We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA.
Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
Welcome back to Notify America. We have multiple pressing stories to get to. Stories that include Tucker's interview with Vladimir Putin finally dropping. We have some clips that I feel are important. Also, President Joe Biden almost breaks down as reporters question him about his fading memory. We have some video of it. It's kind of sad. Also, Sunny Hostin, co-host of The View, a leading proponent, by the way, on national television all the time, pushing reparations policy and white guilt syndrome. Finds out, though, that her ancestors were likely slave owners. We have the clip and more stories from around the world that are important, that corporate media doesn't want to touch. But before we get started, thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It really helps me out. And make sure to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving these daily updates. The Supreme Court of the United States hears arguments yesterday in the Colorado Trump ballot case. And it appears like Donald Trump is about to receive a big victory, finally putting all of this ballot removal nonsense behind us, as both conservative and liberal justices appeared highly skeptical of the Colorado Supreme Court decision. During the arguments, Justice Brett Kavanaugh brought a dose of reality to lead attorney Jason Murray, who's arguing in front of the Supreme Court that the states should have the authority to remove Donald Trump from their ballots, even though he's never been convicted of insurrection. Here's the clip. Watch this.
He had the opportunity to call witnesses remotely. He didn't use all of his time at trial. There was ample process here, and this is how ballot access determinations in election cases are decided all the time.
Okay. Second question. Some of the rhetoric of your position, I don't think it is your position, but some of the rhetoric of your position seems to suggest unless the states can do this, no one can prevent insurrectionists from holding federal office. But obviously Congress has enacted statutes, including one still in effect, Section 2383 of Title 18 prohibits insurrection. It's a federal criminal statute. And if you're convicted of that, you are, it says, shall be disqualified from holding any office. And so there is a federal statute on the books, but President Trump has not been charged with that. So what are we to make of that?
Two things, Your Honor. Section 23.
In another story, the special prosecutor investigating whether President Biden broke the law or not by retaining classified documents after leaving the vice president's office decided not to bring criminal charges. The special counsel's report, 300 plus pages long, states even though President Biden willfully retained these classified documents, we find it hard to imagine convincing a jury to convict him, given he's an elderly man with a waning memory. They actually wrote that. Here's what he said verbatim, quote, Biden will likely present himself to the jury as he did during his interview with our office as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, unquote. And look, he went on to describe Biden's waning mental faculties in detail, saying how he had difficulty conducting the interview, mixing timelines up, and often not remembering things, including, according to the report, not remembering when his son, Beau, passed on. Watch as reporters questioned the president about this yesterday. Watch this.
I know there's some attention paid to some language in the report about my recollection of events. There's even reference that I don't remember when my son died. How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business. Let me tell you something. Some of you have commented, I wear since the day he died, every single day, the rosary he got from Our Lady of... Every Memorial Day we hold a service remembering him, attended by friends and family and the people who loved him. I don't need anyone to remind me when he passed away or passed away.
Tucker Carlson releases his 2-hour and 7-minute long interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin last night, and like he promised, released it for free, unedited, available for everyone to watch. And before we look at it, I just got to say, I watched the full interview, and the juxtaposition between Joe Biden speaking at that press conference yesterday and seeing Vladimir Putin on the screen beside him was striking, because Tucker released the interview a few minutes after that press conference, and Biden being unable to complete even a full sentence, and then seeing Putin for the first 30 minutes of the interview breaking down the long history of Russia going back like 1,000 years or something like that, somehow recalling every important date in Russian history. I mean, he's got a good memory, good mental recall. Clearly an intelligent guy, sharp, when in comparison with our leaders who can barely speak. And in all seriousness, we'll watch some of these clips. We have a few of them, but the major takeaway for me was how, from Russia's vantage point, right, Biden isn't running the United States. That's what I got from the interview. He's not making the decisions. He didn't say this directly, Putin, but instead gave like this long list of examples of how he's met with half a dozen U.S. presidents. Realize he's been in power since 1999. That's when Bill Clinton was in office. And in each case, each U.S. president he's dealt with and met with ended up coming to deals with, making deals with, real agreements that Putin and then the U.S. president would reach would never come to pass. How the U.S. president would be undercut each and every time. How it appears they just don't have the authority to actually make a deal. Or if they do, the intel community cuts them off, undercuts it. And how at this point it seems almost pointless to him to speak with President Biden, as he's not calling the shots anyways. How the machine that is the U.S. government, makes the decisions. That's what, I took from the interview. What exactly is that machine? Is it the three-letter agencies? I don't know. It's sure not the White House, though. And Putin himself seemed almost confused even by how all of this even works, where the decisions are actually made, where the decision-making center comes from. Watch this.
Then maybe something will change.
But you're describing two different systems. You say the leader acts in the interest of the voters, but you also say these decisions are not made by the leader, they're made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long, you've known all these American presidents. What are those power centers in the United States, do you think? Like, who actually makes the decisions?
I don't know. America is a complex country, conservative on one hand, rapidly changing on the other. It's not easy for us to sort it all out. Who makes decisions in the elections? Is it possible to understand this when each state has its own legislation? Each state regulates itself? Someone can be excluded from elections at the state level. It is a two-stage electoral system. It is very difficult for us to understand it. Certainly, there are two parties that are dominant, the Republicans and the Democrats, and within this party system, the centers that make decisions, that prepare decisions. Then, look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia? After all, this is a policy of pressure. NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system. These are all elements of pressure. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then, dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why? I think, among other things, because excessive production capacities were created. During the confrontation with the Soviet Union, there were many centers created and specialists on the Soviet Union who could not do anything else. They convinced the political leadership that it is necessary to continue chiseling Russia, to try to break it up, to create on this territory several quasi-state entities, and to subdue them in a divided form, to use their combined potential for the future struggle with China. This is a mistake, including the excessive potential of those who worked for the confrontation with the Soviet Union. It is necessary to get rid of this. There should be new, fresh forces, people who look into the future and understand what is happening in the world.
Another noteworthy exchange was when Vladimir Putin came out and suggested that the CIA blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and how showing the evidence wouldn't even matter because the U.S. has such a stranglehold on media saying that the U.S. is the leading source of propaganda in the world. Watch this.
It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби, у вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West, did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States, because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes, but here's a question you may be able to answer. You worked in Germany, famously. The Germans clearly know that their NATO partner did this, and it damaged their economy greatly. It may never recover. Why are they being silent about it? That's very confusing to me. Why wouldn't the Germans say something about it?
This also confuses me. But today's German leadership is guided by the interests of the collective West rather than its national interests. Otherwise, it is difficult to explain the logic of their action or inaction.
At the end of the interview, though, Tucker calls out Putin for imprisoning 32-year-old Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, asking Putin directly if he would release Evan into Tucker's custody so he can bring him home.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все лимиты.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил.
We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner. However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that if our partners take reciprocal steps. When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services. Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question. There is no taboo to settle this issue. We are willing to solve it. But there are certain terms being discussed via special services channels. I believe an agreement can be reached.
So typically, I mean, this stuff has happened for obviously centuries. One country catches another spy within its borders, it trades it for one of its own intel guys in another country. I think what makes, and it's not my business, but what makes this different is the guy's obviously not a spy, he's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody knows that. And he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, and everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
Now, you could find the full interview on Tucker Carlson's YouTube channel or on X. I recommend watching it. All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.